Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, a podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Vanessa Spina, aka Ketogenic Girl, is the host of ketogenicgirl.com, a popular website loaded with ketogenic resources. Vanessa is returning to the podcast today after her first episode where we discussed what inspires her, why she started Ketogenic Girl, her thoughts on restriction versus food freedom, fasting, and more. Check out that episode if you missed it the first time. She also hosts her own podcast, Fast Keto, where she interviews doctors, researchers, and keto success stories. I personally love the podcast, and Vanessa has helped hundreds of people lose weight and regain their health through her 28-day challenges and keto meal plans. She makes tons of helpful evidence-based content and shares it for free across her YouTube, Instagram, and podcasts, and shares rational perspectives about diets, mindset, body composition, and practical tips as well. Welcome back, Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Scott, for that beautiful introduction. It just really is very humbling, and it's just an honor to get to be back on your show twice. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. Well, you deserve and have earned every word of it, so you should be proud. And super happy to chat with you today. So Vanessa, I'm curious, one thing that I think would be helpful for folks who are less familiar with your story and is just like a really great case study and example is, can you talk a little bit about how your body composition has changed over the years and maybe how your goals have shifted with it as you've adopted different diets?
Yeah, Scott, I love this topic, and I love that you bring it up because I myself for years focused on a number on the scale and on weight loss. And it took me a really long time to finally understand body composition and how that's really what matters. And I said this last week on my podcast, but I think in the future, once we have the technology to be able to properly and accurately read our body composition at home, that's all we'll go by. We're not going to go by some arbitrary number, which is a measure of like water and bone mass and all these other things, not just, focusing in on what really matters. And that is, what are you made of? What is your body made of? Because it can vary so much, from person to person. I've learned so much about it, and I really try to share that message as much as possible. And in my own journey, I really found that I was doing a lot of dieting, the standard dieting where you just restrict calories, you do a lot of exercise, but they were never sustainable diets for me. And I always had this temporary mindset of like, I'm going to go in and do this detox or do this cleanse or do this diet, and then I'll get to the weight I want to be at. I'll lose the fat, and then I'll go back to whatever I was doing before, which now looking back, I cringe at how, little I understood and knew about body composition. Because one of the things that can happen when you don't pay attention to macronutrient composition and you just restrict the numbers, the calories, and you do more exercise, if you don't focus on the composition of what you're eating, you're not going to change the composition of your body well either. So on all those diets, I always lost a little bit of fat, but I also lost water. I also lost muscle. I also lost bone. But when you regain weight, you mostly just gain fat. So over time, people get to this point where their body composition after years and years of dieting eventually gets worse and worse, more towards fat and less lean body mass. And your metabolism also really suffers because it slows from all the restriction and this, chronic restrictive cycles that we get into. People don't realize how much their body composition suffers. And when I started keto, I actually always knew that I had this feeling a fatness on my body. And I would talk to doctors about it, and they would always tell me that I didn't know what I was talking about, and I looked fine, because on the outside, I looked relatively normal. But when I finally had my body composition scan done, the scan tech was shocked that I was almost 40% body fat. And I was like, oh, I knew this. Like, I knew it instinctively, and I wasn't like as surprised as he was, because looking at me, you just wouldn't have thought that I was in the obese category. And I actually would have laughed at myself, someone like me saying that I was obese. I would have rolled my eyes and been like, you're not obese. But when you understand body composition and how important it is, someone who is very large and heavy can actually be much healthier metabolically if they have a lower body fat and higher lean mass. And as we've been learning so much, our metabolic health really depends on how strong our bodies are, how much lean mass and muscle we have, and also how strong our bones are. And our bones are deposits and like little banks for minerals, and our muscles are the same for amino acids. So you really want to focus on body composition. And after 4 years of keto, I got my body composition down to about 34%. And then I changed the macro composition from a traditional keto diet to more modified keto, which is kind of going against the whole keto, mindset, or the dominant thinking at the time, which is, doing 80 to 90% fat and doing about 15% protein, 5% carb. And I started really bumping up the protein and not so much chasing after the ketones. And I really started seeing dramatic body composition results. So my body composition in 2 years went down to 21% body fat. And so that was getting much better, quicker results in much less time.
Yeah, that's incredible. And there's so many excellent points you brought up there. First of all, going from 40% body fat to 21% body fat is phenomenal. It's incredible. And most people wouldn't realize that just stepping on the scale every day, even if they were doing everything right. So I love how you bring up that point. And I'm curious, did you have low bone mass as well when you were 40% body fat? Because I had a DEXA scan done like 5 years ago at the beginning of my journey, and I was 20% body fat. And I thought I was the picture of health, lean, working out twice a week, lifting weights, eating keto, fasting. But I actually had below osteoporosis levels of bone mass as like a healthy, fit 23-year-old.
Yes.
And they had never seen that before. I went to a bunch of endocrinologists and doctors, and they were mystified. So I'm curious, was your bone mass low as well?
Mine was really low. And the most recent one I did in March, I was above average score. It was really high, like off the charts.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I know now we understand that bone, more than half of it is mineralized protein, this matrix of protein and minerals. And it's fascinating when you start to look into this more, that it makes you really concerned over why we don't test body composition with everything else. That should be, testing body composition and, testing your blood glucose or A1C, like these things should be something that we do on a regular basis. And I think everyone should know what their body composition is. It's really a shame that, you have to go out of your way to get one of these scans done, and they can be also prohibitively expensive. And I really, really think it's a shame. And I hope that with improving technology that we get a home device that is accurate, because none of them that are on the market today are accurate. And it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I totally agree. A lot of those bioimpedance home scales are kind of worthless.
Yeah.
And another great point you brought up is, so many people stop at just calories in, calories out, right? And I need to lower my calories to lose weight. I need to see the scale go down. What sounds like you found is not only was that important, but also switching up your macronutrients, going for a higher protein approach. What about another thing you talk about a lot that I love is the effect of hormones. And a lot of people in the keto sphere will say, calories don't matter. It's all hormones. or vice versa. Calories matter, ignore your hormones. But I feel like you incorporate both really well. So can you talk about how hormones are affected by different diets and different ways of eating?
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think that for most of my life, I believed just the calories in versus calories out model. And then when I came to keto, I was like, oh no, this hormonal or endocrine theory of weight loss, how our hormones actually dictate fat storage and fat loss. Now, this is true. This is valid. So that must invalidate the calories model. But what I've realized, especially since I went back to school and doing a lot of reflection, just because the hormonal theory of weight loss has validity does not just invalidate calories in versus calories out. And I think that there's a lot of black and white thinking that I see in our space where, well, if one thing is debunked, then suddenly it's totally invalid. And yes, it's true. There are aspects of the calories in, calories out model that are not so valid. You get this incredible metabolic advantage when you keep your insulin low. You burn an extra 300 calories per day, something like that. Dr. Ben Bickman has talked about that. You also get this metabolic advantage from prioritizing protein because there's this 30%, thermic effect from breaking down protein. You get these amazing metabolic advantages. But at the end of the day, to dismiss calories, I think does a disservice to people, because then you run into, huge segments of people who are like, well, I'm just eating, carnivore. I'm not eating any carbs and I'm gaining weight. And, they may be overeating. And I think that one of the things that is attributed to carnivore diets, especially, is this like magical thing that happens to your metabolism, but it's not really magical. It's cool to think of it as magical, but it's actually all very scientific. And there's this pattern that happens that I see over and over again is that people allow themselves to eat to fullness and satiety on carnivore. And they usually end up boosting their metabolic rate by doing that. And they just allow themselves to really eat, really nourish their bodies. And after about 6 months in, they tend to have this appetite correction and they start eating about half what they were eating before. And so they lose weight. And there's a lot of like magic attributed to it, but it's really, well, no, you've just basically done a reverse diet. You have, or all-in approach, similar, to Stephanie Buttermore's approach, where you really just let yourself eat as much as you wanted. And in doing that, you reset your metabolism from years of chronic diet and restriction.
Yeah, sorry. And I really like how that you're tying in these concepts from outside of the keto and carnivore world. Like Stephanie Buttermore is this fitness influencer, for folks who don't know, boyfriend of Jeff Nippard, very evidence-based fitness and nutrition, eats a high carb, more if it fits your macros type diet. And she had chronic weight problems, food restriction, and then found by eating as much as she wanted of whatever she wanted for an extended period of time, she kind of fixed her relationship with food and broken metabolism. But like not someone in the keto or carnivore space, but someone you can learn a lot from, especially when you dig into the science behind it. I guess I'm curious, Vanessa, when you collect information, when you do research, what and who have influenced you to try different diets and try these different approaches, whether it's keto or higher protein, carnivore, learning about all-in and reverse dieting? Like, what are some of the sources? And it sounds like it's all over the place, which is fantastic.
It really is, Scott. It's really all over. I try really hard to just stay open to all information and not become closed-minded or just, believe that one thing is valid. And therefore, when you look at science, going back to school and studying biochemistry obviously influenced me a lot. And it made me realize and challenge notions that I had before. Like, I believed carbs were evil for the longest time. And then when I studied it, I realized, well, carbs are carbohydrates and fats or lipids are hydrocarbons, and you think I used to work in like the finance and resources. So I think of hydrocarbons like energy, and they're both energy that our bodies can derive energy. They're both stored forms of energy that we can consume, but there's good fats and there are less good fats, and there are good carbs and there are less good carbs. So looking at the science, you kind of are able to be less biased and more just open. And I think that ultimately we will all benefit more from staying more open to ideas as opposed to just saying, well, this is true, so that's not true. And that black and white, thinking, where I think I found best results when I realized, well, for example, the endocrine theory of weight loss, hormonal theory of weight loss is very valid. So are, carbohydrates. And I try to just watch a lot of different people's content. I try to look at people who have achieved results. Like if they have physically achieved results in their life, whether it's on YouTube or different blogs, then they probably know what they're doing. And I like to just try to expose myself to as many different ideas as possible, because it helps just to continually, shape my thinking, and I think sharpen my thinking. But, trying to stay open is very difficult. You have to try and go outside of your ego and realize that, your ego always wants to be right. And it's always going to try and find information that confirms that it's right. But in that, letting go of that, you ultimately want to seek truth. And that's what matters. And maybe going back to school influenced me more, towards that, and just what's the truth? What's the ultimate truth here? As opposed to what do we want to believe? And we want to just be right all the time.
Yeah, I see a lot of that in our space, and you're absolutely right that the ego tries to protect you, tries to make you feel good and feel confident and feel right. And you have to fight that, push back against it.
Yes.
And one thing I just want to make sure we address it for the listeners. You briefly touched on it, but what is all in and what is reverse dieting, and maybe how are they different, and who are they for?
So this is my favorite topic that I've been, posting and talking about a lot lately. And I've been going on this fitness journey, but also a bit of a metabolic journey, where I realized that, since I was about 12 years old, I've been always dieting, just dieting all the time. And I started to look at how bodybuilders do things in a very structured way, where they have these seasons where they're competing and they have these off seasons, and they give their bodies time to recover and restore their metabolic rate. And a lot of them use this thing called a reverse diet, where after dieting down and restricting their, usually carb intake, that seems to be the biggest, macronutrient that they play with, but they'll dial down fat too. They'll diet down for a fitness competition. They'll get down to, whatever it is, 5-6% body fat. And then they will come out of that for an off season by gradually increasing their calories by about 100 calories every couple of weeks. Everyone does it a little bit differently, but that's around the average that I've seen. And they add in, more resistance training. And by adding the calories back gradually, it allows the body to slowly adapt back to those higher calories while maintaining some of the leanness, and not just say going off that diet right away and then, just putting on a lot of fat. So it's a way of working with your body gradually, where you're increasing calories and you're also increasing your exercise and movement. At the same time, you're building muscle. So you're gaining more muscle in the process, and you're going to have a higher metabolic rate because of that. So I love this concept of the reverse diet. And I really think that in the dieting space, no one really talks about this for the average person. It's always, it's in this bodybuilding space. And there's so much that we can learn from that. So Bill Campbell, who you brought up, Dr. Bill Campbell, who I'm going to have on the podcast, he has done a bunch of research around different ways of dieting. And one really cool thing he found in a recent study was that people who took diet breaks, they ultimately had the same fat loss results, but that they were actually able to maintain lean body mass better in doing diet breaks. So there's kind of these different things that you can do to maintain the results that you get after your diet. And I think it's one of the most critical parts of a diet is how you end it. Because as many of us know, we don't know what to do when we're done dieting. You restricted calories, you've done a bunch of cardio, okay, you got to your goal. Now what? And that's why people just gain weight back and end up with worse off body composition. So I'd love to see more people apply some of the concepts of reverse dieting into their lives so that they know how to reverse out of a diet, how to maintain, how to take time off, how to just let your body restore and recover its metabolism. And this is specifically for people who have done a lot of restriction and a lot of dieting. Unfortunately, the metabolism is always adapting because its prime directive, aside from homeostasis, is keeping us alive. And so, so many people, they just don't know anything other than dieting. Like me, I didn't know anything else than dieting. My whole life, I've always been trying to lose fat in some way. So the idea of just taking time where I'm not trying to diet, I'm just building muscle. I'm in a season where I'm optimizing body composition, building muscle, and boosting and restoring my metabolic rate. That's going to mean that in the end, I can cut weight later at a higher metabolic rate, at a higher amount of food and higher amount of calories, as opposed to this trap that you can get into when you're doing a lot of dieting, a lot of fasting, a lot of these things where they're all just different methods of reducing calories. And I know there's this other side of it. Yes, you're not stimulating insulin. That's very important too. But the main thing that you're doing with these, different strategies is reducing your caloric intake, and your metabolic rate will adapt down to the point where you may be on very little food, but you're not losing weight anymore. Your body composition isn't improving. And that's a time when you would want to do a reverse diet, take a break, allow your body to go back to a normal amount of food. If you're under 2,000 calories, at least go back up to that. I have a calorie calculator that I just launched at ketogenicgirl.com, and you can calculate your maintenance calories. And if you're eating below that, you can make a goal to gradually move back up to that, and then just take some time of resting, recovering your metabolism, and then maybe plan to do a shortcut for a few months before summer or something, and have a more long-term mindset as opposed to that more, short-term mindset where you don't know what you're actually going to do after you get to your goal.
A lot of people ask me about how to make liver more tasteful and how to cook it or incorporate other organ meats on carnivore. Optimal Carnivore can help you do just that with their grass-fed organ complex. It was created by carnivores for carnivores. They start by sourcing 100% grass-fed organ meats from New Zealand, gently freeze-drying the organs and encapsulating them into convenient bovine gelatin capsules. Just 6 of these capsules a day is the same as eating an ounce of raw organ meat. I personally take these every single day, as does my wife. Even though we both eat liver and other organ meats, our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal. And this unique blend has 9 different organs, including beef liver, brain, thymus, kidney, spleen, etc. And I think it's great to get a daily dose of these organs when you can. So it covers all your bases, whether you're at home or traveling. What's also cool is they plant a tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. So visit www.optimalcarnivore.com/carnivorecast and use the code carnivore10 to receive 10% off your purchase. Thanks, and back to the show. That's absolutely excellent. I agree with everything you just said. And I really think people need to think not just lose fat, lose fat, lose fat, lose fat, no end. There's really a specific purpose to having planned dieting periods, maintenance periods, gradually gaining periods, and all of these tools, diet breaks, refeeds, reverse dieting, all in. We won't go in depth and define all those terms and exactly when you use one or another. But the broader point of having a plan, a longer term plan, and giving your body a break from the stress of dieting, I think is super valid. And shifting topics a little bit, Vanessa, I want to talk a little bit about higher protein. And maybe we can start with why you started doing that, what protein leveraging is, and then maybe what are some of the limitations of protein leveraging? Like, especially for people who are carnivores, and, let's take someone who's active like me and needs 3,000 calories a day, but I only weigh 160 pounds. Like, is there a point where just continuously upping my protein isn't productive, maybe? And maybe what you found around those.
Yeah, this is such an important question. So I was really influenced by the work of Dr. Ted Naiman because I personally came from a background where I never prioritized protein. So this is a new concept to me. I was vegetarian for about 17 years, and then I started keto as a vegetarian. Then I started adding animal foods back into my diet, but never in my life did I ever think, oh, I need to prioritize protein. And this is another thing that started really standing out to me as I was studying bodybuilders and what they do. They prioritize protein. It's the key macronutrient. And these are the people who have the best physiques, right? So why not look to what they're doing in terms of accomplishing that, best body composition possible? And one of the things that really stood out to me was Dr. Ted Naiman pointed to a lot of the research of Robin Howard Simpson, who are actually going to come on the podcast soon too. And they
Awesome.
they did all this research that came up with this protein leverage theory that Dr. Ted Naiman has really popularized, but it's really their work. And they did so much research on what different animals eat, including humans, and what happens when you do these ad lipidem studies where people go to a buffet, but they preload either with like a mixed diet or with really high protein. And what they found is that the people who pre-ate lots of protein ate way less when they went to a buffet. And so it makes so much sense when you think about how protein has so many essential amino acids. It's an essential macronutrient. It's one that our bodies, we cannot make these proteins on our own. We have to get it. So it's very, very logical, and that really appealed to me. So I started increasing my protein because I wanted to experiment with, the body composition, body recomposition, and also with, the satiety. And I really have achieved both in doing that. I love that you brought up the downsides to it, though, because I do think that the first thing I wanted to find out when I was researching this is it safe? And all of the protein scientists that I had on the program really convinced me through their research that eating more protein is definitely safe for the average person, especially if they're resistance trained. But I think there are certain issues that people can run into when they're doing higher levels of protein. One of them I think I've identified is the nitrogen load that can be placed on the body with higher protein. And this can cause issues for people like swelling or getting up a lot in the night to urinate. And I think it has to do with the nitrogen load, because in breaking down protein, the body has to sequester the nitrogen into ammonia, which is then transformed into urea and then excreted as urine. It has to do that with the protein. So there's an upper limit, even if you don't care about maintaining ketogenesis and your goal is body composition. I think that, that's something important to keep in mind, is you want to make sure you're not having issues like that. The blood sugar.
Yeah, I definitely had that problem.
Yeah, it's not, something's off, right? You're like, there's something, my body's dealing with something, and it can start retaining water because it has to deal with all this nitrogen. And so that can be something that people run into in eating higher protein that can easily be rectified just by bringing the protein down. And the same goes for identifying, there's your protein threshold, which I've talked about for years with regards to ketogenesis. But I think there's also protein threshold, and there is sort of diminishing returns after a certain point where your body gets enough protein. To me, I think that's what I've seen is around 1 gram of protein, for ideal body weight. When you start to go above that, yes, you can do it safely, but do you really want to put that kind of burden on your body because at that point, your body, because you can't store amino acids, you are, no matter what, turning some of those amino acids into glucose. And at that point, you're creating energy from this protein. Well, why not just eat fat and carb instead for energy. It's non-efficient, so you burn off more calories eating it. You can get away with eating more of it, but then you also have these diminishing returns where, muscle protein synthesis is triggered, when your blood levels of leucine go up by about 2 to 3 grams. And above that, it doesn't do much. So I think it's important to prioritize the right kinds of protein. There's certain protein that has more leucine in it. Dairy actually milk has the highest amount of leucine. And then, other animal foods, obviously ribeye, poultry, and fish, other forms of protein have a lot of leucine, but milk actually has the most, which is why I eat a lot of yogurt. And it can really help to trigger muscle protein synthesis. But once it's triggered, eating more protein doesn't have any more advantages. So protein pulsing, having multiple protein meals throughout the day does trigger muscle protein synthesis, several times, but eating more protein at a meal than about 30 grams of protein doesn't.
Yeah, really interesting. And I love how you brought up the point of like past a certain point, just having more and more protein isn't that productive. And I know there are a lot of people who undereat protein. So I think overall, like I totally respect and love Ted Naiman. I think he's helped so many people, puts out super valuable information. Mm-hmm. But there's also a large group of people, especially in the keto or carnivore space, who are easily eating a gram per pound of body weight. Easily. Like it is just so easy to eat that much protein when you're eating like a pound, 2 pound, 3 pounds of meat a day.
Yes.
And I think for those people, the message of protein leverage isn't always as helpful because they could be increasing their fat, increasing their carbs through reintroducing foods and have better satiety, have better energy, not have some of these downside effects of, the nocturia, the excess nitrogen conversion, etc., that really does put somewhat of a toll on your body. So I think it's important to tell both sides of the story.
Yes, you're so right. And his advice is so fantastic. I'm such a huge fan of his. I also think that a lot of his advice is optimized for the average person who may be obese or coming from a standard American diet, or someone who he sees is like doing keto and they're eating tons of fat and they're not losing weight. He's like, well, maybe if you reduce some of your fat intake, you'll get some results. And I think that's really helpful. But it can also make people fear energy. He's like, well, protein to energy, try to get twice as much protein for the energy. But, we do have to fuel our bodies, and fueling your body just off of protein is not going to be optimal. So yeah, I really agree with that.
Yeah, that's right. And I know recently you've moved back a little bit on the high protein for yourself, maybe reintroduced some foods. You talked about yogurt. What other foods have you reintroduced and why? And what is kind of your current focus?
Yeah, so I, was doing carnivore for a couple of years. I really enjoyed it. I really wanted to connect with my intuitive sense of eating in a way that was very instinctual. And I found that if you make foods as plain as possible, then you'll only be interested in those foods when you're actually hungry. So that was a really interesting experiment for me, because if you're actually hungry, you will want just like plain burgers with some eggs. Once you're full, you're not interested in eating any more burgers or eggs. So just keeping food really plain helped me. For a while, I started to lose a little bit too much weight in the spring of last year because I just started just really living to eat, which was my goal for so long. But I think that it is important to make sure that you at least maintain your weight. And then I was in this, my goal was, and what I'm optimizing for now is gain muscle. And I couldn't do that if I wasn't eating adequately. So that's why I started doing this reverse diet. And I noticed in the summer, I was craving a lot of salad. So when we went out to restaurants, they usually bring a side of salad or something if you don't get, the fries or bun with your burger. And so I started reintroducing just salads, cucumbers, some vegetables, and I really liked it. And it helped me to place less emphasis on just eating meat. Because I think it's possible to just overdo the protein like we were talking about. If that's all you're eating, But then if you don't want to overdo the protein, then you might not eat enough, which happened, to me. I never thought I would say that. It did. And carnivore is so satisfying, especially if you eat a lot of organ meats, like I do. So I definitely found this satiety was I was able to eat more by bringing in some salads back in, some a few other vegetables, and then I brought back sweeteners in too, to just have like something appealing. Like I make I make the egg pudding that everyone loves, and I add some vanilla and stevia into it and make it a bit of a dessert. And I just found that it was a satisfying thing to have at the end of a meal, and that my relationship with these things really changed over doing that. Like, it was 3 years of no sweeteners and doing 2 years of carnivore, really making sure my body had adequate nutrients, adequate protein, and it shifted the way that I approached food, where before, because I wasn't getting my protein needs met and they were undermet for so many years, that I didn't feel like I really had control when it came to eating. Like I would always eat more than I wanted to. But then by prioritizing protein and doing that carnivore for a couple of years, I got to the point where it corrected my appetite, and I'm able to moderate things that I didn't think I'd be able to before. So it's been really interesting, and just all this different experimentation. It's amazing how much experimentation you can do. Right now, I've been moderating the protein back down, amping up more of the energy side of things, more of the fat, more of the carbs. I've been bumping up my calories by about 100 calories every couple of weeks, and just, continuing to eat where am I feeling optimal energy wise. I'm going to have an upcoming body scan, so I'll be able to see, what these results did for me. I still maintain 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So I haven't gone below that, but for a while I was doing like 3-4 times that in my experiments, and, started running into some of those issues we talked about before. So I'm still doing high protein, but, I've been able to kind of make it a little bit more balanced, let's say, by adjusting things.
It's super interesting to hear, Vanessa, because I've come from a very similar place as well. I think I was kind of chronically dieting, chronically under eating. I got to a point where I was like dieting on 1,700 calories with keto, sometimes with higher protein. And for, an active 28-year-old who lifts weights 5 times a week, 4 times a week, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. And now my maintenance calories are probably 3,000, 3,200.
That's awesome.
And right now I'm probably eating 3,700 calories a day trying to build muscle. And I similarly found after 3 strict years of very, very strict carnivore, no cheat meals, no dairy, no anything, that it has benefited me to bring in some more carbohydrates and some more other foods. Still keeping it animal based, similar to you. But for me, much higher carbohydrates on top of that. I'm curious, would you ever go higher carb, non-keto? Like, it sounds like you're still keeping it very, very low carb.
Yeah. So because of the yogurt, I get most of my carbs from yogurt and from vegetables. And I find that adding that in, I have no problem with it, but I'm not optimizing for ketosis right now. I'm doing it more for muscle gaining and making sure that I'm really well fueled. Like I do a 2-hour hike in the mornings, and then I come home and I do resistance training. So I'm trying to really be fueled for that. The thing is, when I was doing the reverse diet, I definitely considered adding in more carbs, because that's how most people do a reverse diet. And you can get less fat storage because it's really very small percentage of carbohydrates that are converted into body fat. Most of our body fat comes from, fat that we eat. So I definitely considered it, but those foods don't have any appeal for me anymore. Like I was sitting there, I'm like, what am I going to have to eat? Like rice, oatmeal, sweet potatoes, like all these things don't really appeal to me anymore. I see them as kind of empty foods. So I find fat and fats to just have a lot more nutrients in them, and to be like, if I'm going to choose one over the other, it's definitely always going to be more on the fat side of things. But I have increased my calories. I would say on a daily basis, they're up around 50, which for years, they were more like 20 total. And they're mostly coming from the yogurt, from, salads, from vegetables. And I think that those are just really healthy, low starch, low glycemic carbs. And I think they can really make, part of a healthy diet if you're active and you want to be really well fueled. And, I think, like I said, fats and carbs, ultimately, there's good ones, there's bad ones of both. They're both energy. And, we don't have to hate, we don't have to hate on carbohydrates so much. They are fuel, they are energy, and there are good ones, and there are definitely bad carbs that you want to avoid at all costs. Like, I didn't want to bring in, rice and sweet potato and oatmeal, because I know that I don't find a lot of satisfaction with those foods, and that they don't keep my blood sugar as stable, which I find has really benefited me just in having a stable blood sugar throughout the day. And being, fat fueled, I'm definitely more on the side of that because I do so much activity.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I agree that carbs aren't evil, but it ultimately comes down to personal preference. Once you meet the protein needs, like I like how you just describe it as energy.
Yeah.
And thinking about energy sources.
Yeah.
Cool. And you mentioned exercise. You talked about your hikes, resistance training, and you talk about this a lot on your podcast, but I think it'd be really helpful for my listeners to hear how your approach to exercise has changed.
Yeah. So for years, I wasn't a big fan of exercise because I had done it for so many years and had continued to gain weight. And I felt like I was always running on a treadmill for like an hour more a day, and I was restricting my calories, not realizing that that was actually slowing my metabolic rate. And that if you're out, like if your body thinks you're out hunting all the time and you're not eating a lot, it's going to slow your metabolism down. So what I realized though is that there's definitely better forms of exercise. And I think as a woman, we tend to go towards the cardio, and men tend to go more towards weights. It's kind of a social construct. But in the last several years, I've really seen women embracing resistance training, strength training, and letting go of this like fear of getting bulky or, looking built. And like women can have cut arms and like have some, muscle on them, and that it looks really good. It looks really healthy. And I think that it's because we understand, Dr. Gabriel Lyon has been such a huge proponent of this, but we really understand that muscle is our metabolic currency. It's our, storage banks, storage vaults of amino acids. And we want to have that as we get older. And so when you make the connection between metabolic health and muscle, it helps you to embrace that more. So I started adding in the resistance training with my reverse diet. So I do 2 days a week of leg and glute days and 2 days a week of arm, core, and back. And then I do 1 or 2 HIIT days a week of high intensity interval training. Just I have some YouTubers that I love to watch, and they do really good HIIT exercises at home. And then I usually do hike in the mornings during the weekday after a couple hours of work. And then on the weekend when the weather's nice, which has been amazing this year, we go bike riding usually on one or both days. So I try to take a couple rest days from the resistance training, but that's been something that I have loved picking up because it's something that you see consistent progress with. And I really want people to get away from the scale and like having certain numbers in their head, because I think those numbers get placed in our minds really arbitrarily. And when you start doing this kind of reverse diet and strength training, you will gain weight, and that's a good thing. And that's a really backwards concept for so many of us. We always want to see our weight going down, losing weight, but you want to be gaining weight when you're resistance training. So if you don't like seeing the scale go up, it's better to just not weigh yourself. Just go at how you look, how you feel. And adding in muscle is really encouraging when you start because you get newbie gains and your body responds so rapidly to the stimulus of growing muscle that you can really grow a lot of lean mass. So I added about 8 pounds of muscle in 2 years, and my next scan, I'll find out how much more I've added, but I'd like to be at about 20% body fat and just keep lowering body fat by adding muscle as opposed to just always focusing on lowering body fat by losing fat. So it's just a different approach to it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I really love what Dr. Gabriel Lyon and the Keto Gains guys as well as yourself and many others have done about promoting muscle building and thinking about lean tissue as the organ of longevity and part of a beautiful physique and part of being healthy for women. Because I really think that is lacking. And it's really sad to go into the gym and just see all dudes in the weightlifting area and see women on the cardio equipment and say, this is totally wrong. And I think a lot of that just comes from culture and pop media.
Yeah, it's really cool to see things changing. Like I love Dr. Fit and Fabulous. She's like
she's
beauty
great.
Beauty pageant contest, and she's like redefining the way that we look at female beauty because she's like so jacked and she looks amazing. And I just love looking at her photos and her like crown and her dress and everything because we never grew up seeing that. We always saw women's beauty as like being small and thin, and here she is like Mr. Nebraska, and she's got these raging arms, and she's such a great role model for young women to know. Like, I think ultimately women's bodies changes. The ideal of women's bodies have changed a lot throughout the years, but there's one I think that makes the most sense, and that's a healthy body image, and that goes with strength.
Yeah,
that's really what's beautiful and should be beautiful in women's bodies.
Totally agree with that. Well, Vanessa, this has been absolutely awesome. I think my listeners will get a ton out of this. And if folks enjoyed this, they should definitely check out Vanessa's podcast and all her content. She goes much more in depth. And as I said before we started recording, I've just found all your content lately to be so informative, educational, inspiring, and entertaining. So we definitely encourage folks to go check that out.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's such an honor to be on your podcast. If anyone wants to go listen to Fast Keto, I absolutely love talking about these topics, and I really appreciate it. And I love, getting the chance to be on your show with your listeners because you have an amazing listener group and listener base and community. And you're just such a kind, caring individual, Scott. And you can tell in all your podcasts that you really care about people and helping people. So it's just, like I said, it's an honor to be on your show again.
Oh, thank you. Wow. That really means a lot. I appreciate that. And I'll definitely link to all of your content in the show notes, but just let people know where they can find you and maybe some of the things that you have coming up.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. So I'm at Ketogenic Girl on Instagram. I started working more on my YouTube channel in the past year or so. So that's Ketogenic Girl on YouTube. And I try to put the video versions of the podcast on there. And you can find more recipes and things like that at ketogenicgirl.com. And yeah, so you can find me in a lot of places under that. So thank you so much for letting me share about that. I have a book, which is called Keto Essentials, and I'm working on some new projects I'm really excited to share about soon. I can only tease about them right now, but I'm really, really excited. There's some new user products that I think are going to be really useful for people. So excited to share about that when I can soon.
Awesome. Well, I'll be on the lookout for that, certainly. And thanks again for your time today, Vanessa. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Scott.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on Carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered? Or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Carnivore Cast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.